Hey Glenn, how you doing, man?
Okay, what do you want to talk about?
All right. Well, we're gonna go through a couple of different things. Let's start with you in the WHA. I love talking to players that both have experience in the NHL and the WHA because I'm curious about, was the WHA designed to be truly competition to the NHL, or was it designed to kind of force the NHL to eventually acquire it and buy it out?
Well, I think they started in the beginning with the thought that it would be good competition for the league. And I wasn't there then. And I played 2 years in the WHA. I went to Edmonton as a player, and I ran all the practices. Bet Gwydlin told me that I was going to be the captain and run the practices. So I said, you sure you want to do that? You're the coach. He said, yeah, I'll be the coach, but you run the practices.
So you're the coach.
That's where I got started. It was kind of strange. Then the next year, he came to me and said that I was going to be run all the practices, and I was going to be the playing coach. And he was going to sit in the stands and recruit for next year. And I said, if I become the coach on this team, I said, you'll get fired and I'll be the coach next year. So the guys that owned the team were Nelson Skalpani and Peter Pocklington, and that's what happened. We had to win 8 of our last 10 games to get in the playoffs. We made the playoffs. And then what happened, we got beat by Houston, which had Gordie Howe and his kids on.
Mm-hmm.
And we lost. I can't remember how many games, but we lost anyway.
How is it?
The end of the season, had a meeting with Skalbani and Pocklington and Beth Gwydlin and Gordie Robson. And they fired both those two guys, and I took over the team.
And you were kind enough to warn them that that was going to happen. So good on you.
Yeah, I told them it was going to happen.
As a player coach, you know, it's such a rarity. You know, the other one that comes top of mind for me is Pete Rose, and that's baseball. That's a little bit easier. How are you managing shifts while you're actually playing on the ice?
Well, I would just, I guess the state of mind that I could kind of control things both ways. And it worked out fine. You know, I knew all the players because I'd been coaching them in practice and I'd been playing with them.
Mm-hmm.
So it got a little complicated when I had to discipline a couple of the guys who were good friends, and I was still playing. But it worked out fine. It was fine. And then the next year I took over.
Mm-hmm.
And then the year after that, that year that we took over, we got Gretzky from Indianapolis.
Yeah.
And we had a pretty good team. We got beat by Winnipeg in the finals the last year that league operated. And then the next year we got in the NHL.
You mentioned a moment there, almost like it was a throwaway. You got Gretzky, and apparently that was a somewhat controversial decision at the time because there were concerns about his size. One of the most outspoken being Howie Meeker, saying, "Nah, this kid's too small to play in the league." But you told Pocklington, "Do whatever it takes to get him." How quickly did you know you had made the right decision?
Well, the first day that we were in Indianapolis, we were playing that night, and that morning at the morning skate, I was running our team and watching their team, and I thought that this young kid that was on the ice was one of the players' sons, because he was not very big, and he was just 17. And I said, this can't be the right guy. And then we got the game sheets, and sure enough, that was the guy. And he scored 2 goals that night, one from behind the net on their goalie, and then he came out in front and scored another one. And I said, this guy's a real thing. I said, he's got great hockey IQ, and it's pretty obvious that he's going to be a hell of a player. So we made the deal with him that night. I told him what we wanted, and Peter did the deal, and I think he gave up a diamond ring and a Rolls Royce. So
good deal.
Yeah, it was a good deal. But, Winnipeg had the chance to get him as well. And Rudy Pillis was the manager and said he's too small, he can never play.
Wow.
So that's how it happened.
And then, pretty much the entire trajectory of the league changes from there. The Islanders certainly dominate the league for a little while, but there's this new flux of talent coming in and a new group of teams. And the Oilers were at the forefront of that. I was looking over some of the early drafts, Glenn, and it's almost impossible. You got Andy Moog, Yari Kurri, and Paul Coffey all in the same year. I mean, it's almost like you were just God bestowed upon you this talent.
Well, sometimes you got to be lucky to be good. And, we had Barry Fraser was our head scout. He spent a lot of time in Europe before guys were over there. Jimmy Nielsen found Andy Moog in Billings, Montana. He was the only one that had seen him. By the way, Jimmy Nielsen passed away, and there's a movement trying to get him in the Hockey Hall of Fame. And he was a great player and a good guy, and he was from Winnipeg, and just a really good player, good defensive player. And there's been a lot of guys that have been elected in the Hall of Fame that had the same stats that he has. And there's a place for people that are real good defensemen. But
managing
it did change.
It was so the Edmonton Oilers, which still a lot of people couldn't find on a map, became an absolutely a national American sports story. Like Wayne Gretzky was as household of a name as any of them, as Herschel Walker, as Joe Montana. And how was it to see hockey grow like that and have to oversee that growth? And then also, because the spotlight was on you, ensure some success to go along with that growth?
Well, it was tricky because, we didn't win the Stanley Cup until 5 years down the road. And the fourth year, the Islanders beat us and gave us a good idea what it took to win. And it was a learning curve, and you got to be patient. You can't be impatient and try to be successful in this league. You got to be really careful, especially with young talent, young people, because it takes them a little while to mature and to grow into the role and then figure out what they have to do to be successful. And then we just put the pieces in around those guys to try and protect them, because the league, of course, was different in those days.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a tough enough and a talented enough team that we could survive and play against anyone. And that's what happened. And we changed the style as well.
Yeah. I mean, it's a record that still stands for most goals scored in a season. I mean, Gretzky was putting up numbers like no one else, but wasn't the only type of player on the team. Like, it wasn't just fast, ultra talented players. You had the stay-at-home defenseman, and then you had Mark Messier, who you could argue is one of the top three centers of all time. And Messier and Gretzky's style of play was so different. Was that intentional, or were you just grabbing the talent that you saw as talented?
Well, when we drafted Mark, I think it was in the third round, and he played in Cincinnati that year in the WHA, that draft came up. And he was an underage player, and a lot of guys, we watched him play, and I think he only scored one goal that year, and he played left wing. But he was such a great skater. And when we drafted him, I think he was like 185 pounds. And,
wow.
He was 210 when he was finished. And he was ripped. I mean, he's a strong, really good player, a great skater, and he was tough. I think he's third in scoring in the history of the NHL right now. But great player. And the problem with what we had and what we developed, and Peter got into some financial problems when he sold Wayne, and then we couldn't pay the players for what they were worth, and we had to really dismantle it. And it was tough doing that stuff. But
yeah, I mean, you definitely did. We're going to get to that in a second. But yet you had that run, and it's a fabled run, and as a Flyers fan, 1987 is still a crushing memory for me, because it was like, oh, we came so close to beating you guys. Hextall even nabbed the Conn Smythe Award that year. when I think of you and I think of that run, you think of other legendary teams, and the Chicago Bulls come to mind. You have all these superstars, and you had probably upwards of 6, 7 Hall of Famers on the squad at the same time. At that point, is it just about sort of managing personalities? Or, I mean, you mentioned you ran practices as a player. What was it like running practices then?
Well, I had an idea how I wanted us to play, and we didn't play the conventional style. A lot of teams play that style today in the NHL, and we were pretty much a run and gun team. And Grant Fuhr was a goaltender, and Andy Moog was a goaltender, and I mean, we had a great bunch of guys, and they all were pretty much around the same age. They grew up together. They got married together pretty well, and had kids at the same time. So it was more of a family atmosphere than just a team.
Mm-hmm.
And these guys grew up together. And we had Marty McSorley and Semenko and McClellan, all tough guys, Dave Hunter. And they took care of business when it had to be taken care of in those days.
Yeah.
But the important part was that we had to play as a team and stick together and make sure that nobody could take advantage of players that weren't tough. Like Wayne wasn't tough. He was smart. You couldn't hit him. He seemed like he had eyes in the back of his head all the time. But he is an intelligent guy that could analyze where everybody was on the ice, and you could ask him a question after the game. He could tell you who was on the ice for the other team and your team when the goals were scored. And it made it a lot easier to be able to handle people like that were focused.
Yeah.
And they were focused.
Was Wayne a natural leader? Was he someone, or did he just kind of lead because he was a guy putting up 200 points a year?
Well, he led because of that reason as well, but he wasn't the only leader on that team. Paul Coffey was a leader. Lee Fogland was a leader. We had a lot of guys that were leaders. Messier, Kevin Lowe was a strong personality in the room. And they kept things in line. And Randy Gregg we got him, he was playing in Japan, Kyoto, Japan. And I went over to see him, and then the league went on strike, so I never did see him, but I phoned him, and I'd seen him play at the University of Alberta. So he was another strong personality. But they were all focused. They were all after the same dream, and that's what they wanted, and that's what they got.
So how much of a role of leader did you have to play?
Well, I had a lot to do with it, but I like to let the team play with themselves and not interfere too much. The things that I did was I made the trades and made sure that I could protect the players when they got in trouble, and they got in trouble, and try to give them as much guidance as I could. And they listened. I mean, they really, really grew up with me, so they paid attention when I spoke to them.
Do you think that the fact that there was less of an age difference, and you retire and become an incredibly young head coach, did that help at all? Because their experiences were so close to the same exact experiences you had.
I think it probably helped. I think the credibility that I had as a player, and I wasn't a star player by any means, but I had played 10 years in the league, and I had experience with playing. I knew who could play and who couldn't play, and we have training camp, and I could tell you right after the first skate who wasn't going to make the team. And you have to have a second sense, and you have to be able to understand personalities. And when I was playing for the Boston Bruins and I was in the minors, actually I started with Detroit the first year in Memphis, and then I got picked up in an interleague draft and was drafted by Harry Sinden. So I had some pretty good coaches along the line to show me what to do and help me. And I took child psychology when I was going to the University of Oklahoma City. And whether that ever helps, who knows? But you got to remember, though, these guys were all kids. We had 3 or 4 guys who were 18 or 19 on that team that had the potential to be a star in the NHL. So they've got to make sure that they understand what they're going to do and what they're capable and what they can't do and how they have to live.
So basically just kind of keeping themselves out of their own way. Did you see that? A 19-year-old that clearly had the talent, but didn't have, just didn't have any potential for the maturity to play at that level.
Well, I think, let me just get rid of this phone call.
Sure.
Lisa, let me phone you back. I'm just doing a Zoom call here. Okay. That's Grant Fuhr's wife.
Oh, Grant's going to be on the show coming up.
Yeah, he's a good guy. Just finished playing his golf tournament, which is a big success, and he raised a lot of money for the Betty Ford Center. And
oh, great.
So it'll be good. Now I'll go back to that question. What did you ask me again?
It's just that, it's, I've talked to a few players now. We've done a few episodes here, and a lot of them were bullies. And all of a sudden you go from living in Flin Flon, where you're famous in Flin Flon, but then all of a sudden you're just nationally famous. And it's, as a 23-year-old kid, that's a tough thing to all of a sudden handle. You have all this kind of new attention, all these new temptations, more wealth than you've ever experienced. How much of a role did you play in instructing these young guys? And I'm eternally fascinated with this, in that, okay, this is great now, but if you want to keep it great, and if you want to, have a great life afterwards, there's some things you're going to have to work on.
Well, we had John Muckler and Teddy Green as assistant coaches. And when I left the coaching, John became the head coach. Teddy Green was still there. But I mean, they were helpful. They were older than me and probably a little more mature. But the focus that I had was trying to push the players in the right direction and letting them understand that if they don't follow the guidelines. I mean, every year I traded 2 or 3 guys off that team for one reason or another, and tried to get people that were probably better players. Not to say that the guys that we traded weren't good players, but they kept everybody on their toes. It kept people sharp.
Mm-hmm.
And it made them focus on the games ahead. And I used to say, when things started to change in the NHL, guys started getting big contracts. I said to a reporter one day, I said, the only thing that's going to stop this team in the next couple of years is money. Because we're a small market team, mm-hmm. and our owner was having some financial problems, and we weren't able to pay what the market was then in those days. So that's really how the team was dismantled. But even when Wayne was sold to LA, we won the Stanley Cup.
Yeah. And that, there's still anniversaries, articles written about the day that trade was announced, but it was as much as a kind of a sell-off as a trade, really.
It wasn't a trade, Zach. It was a sale.
A sale.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Describe your feelings on that day. Because, you said you guys grew up together and you had known Wayne at that point. I know early on in his career, he actually lived at your house. I mean, there must have been a lot of paternal hurt that you were feeling as he was being sold off to Los Angeles.
Well, the whole city was hurting.
Yeah.
I mean, when that happened, it was an emotional, downfall for the team and for me and my family. And it was a tough deal to go through.
Who had to tell Wayne?
I've often said that the guy that writes the paychecks is the guy that has the control over the team. You try to steer in the right direction and help him make the right decisions. And mm-hmm. I mean, I certainly didn't agree with that.
Yeah.
But it was his point that he had to do something, and he did. So.
Were you there when Wayne found out, or were you tasked with telling him?
No, I didn't tell him. I can't remember who told him, but I was with Peter when he told me what he had done, and we got on. I said, "You can't do that. I'm not going to do it." And we got on the phone with with Bruce McNall, and he told me the deal is done. If he didn't do it, finish it off, he was going to sue him. And then I kind of restructured the deal, and the other guys who were in that were Mike Krusnelewski and Marty McSorley, 2 really good players.
Yeah.
And we ended up getting Martin Jelena, 3 first-round picks, and Jimmy Carson. And that Carson was there. He scored 50 goals. He was a good player, but he didn't fit in with the organization that we thought he would. So I traded him to Detroit and got four players from Detroit for Jimmy Carson. We won the Stanley Cup that year. So it worked pretty good.
And you did. You lost the most key component, arguably in NHL history, but still made the playoffs the following year. Got knocked out, unfortunately, by Gretzky's LA Kings team, and then come back and win it. And when people tout Messier as the greatest leader of all time, that's definitely one of the years they really point to.
Yeah, he was great. He took over.
Yeah. Was that just inevitable? Did you know that, okay, Gretzky's gone, Messier is the guy now?
Well, Mark's a strong personality, and it was obvious that somebody had to step up to the plate and do things. And he did. He was a great player and great guy and great leader in the room. And, he had a strong support staff with him. And they all pulled their boots up. They were playing for their own pride at that time. You couldn't get Wayne back.
Yeah. So
you either lay down or you stand up and stick your chin out and get dirty when it has to be. And that's what they did.
Do you think you were the first example of an era where salaries were really going to start to dictate what lineups looked like? Maybe an example of the only way a small market team can truly win, developing a lot of their homegrown talent. You see Edmonton now, kind of a bit of a rebirth of success there. And it's because they've just been able to accumulate these draft picks where, larger market teams can go kind of poach who they need. Is that the only path forward, do you think, for a team like Edmonton? Or, you mentioned Winnipeg. They certainly don't have the cash that Chicago does.
Oh, Winnipeg's got cash.
Do they?
Sure. I mean, just about every team in the league is their salaries are at the max. And that stopped people from going and poaching people.
Mm-hmm.
And money doesn't buy a team. Sometimes, you get players that are overpaid and they think they are worth more than they're really paid,
mm-hmm.
and they don't play as hard. You're making $8 or $10 million. You're not going to go in the corner as hard as you are if you're just a young guy that's starting out.
Right.
I mean, that's not everybody's like that, because a lot of these guys that are making that kind of money deserve it. And they've got a lot of pride in themselves. I mean, look at how Crosby's been. There's lots of guys that are just terrific players and terrific people. But some guys, they don't fall into that category. And you can try and sign a free agent that is not making big bucks. He comes to your team, and now he's making some big bucks, and he's going to enjoy himself a little bit.
But that happens in all sports, and it seems those big contracts, and there's a couple with the Flyers organization right now that get brought up quite frequently. Yet still those big contracts are given out, and it almost seems inevitably, especially the long 5 or 6 year deals, the team ends up paying the price, at least for a couple of the deals or of the years on the back end. In your mind, is it still worth pursuing those kind of big blockbuster contracts?
Well, if you want to have a competitive team in this league, you need some stars, and you have to pay them, and that's the market price. I mean, we're in the WHA. A lot of our guys weren't even making $100,000, but they were winning 3-4 Stanley Cups. So they're playing for pride. And now, because you're making money, I mean, look at the basketball players, what they make. These guys all work hard. Football players, quarterbacks make a lot of money. That's just the nature of the beast. Times have changed. It's not in the 80s anymore, or the 70s. And you've got a cap, and you've got big television rights, and you've got suites in the buildings, and the owners are hurting now because it's COVID, the way it's, I saw the game today against Boston and Washington. They got 3,500 people in the building.
Yeah.
Somebody's got to pay. The league's going to lose a lot of money this year. And they're functioning, and they're doing what they can do to survive. And it's been tough. Look at Vancouver. They had 25 guys out with COVID once this year. And now they got to play 15 games in 30 days. And that's tough.
That's almost impossible.
Yeah.
So you went from a small market to a rather large market. very, very large market, the New York Rangers. Um, did you feel a difference in the amount of attention you were getting? Because I only asked that because I remember one time I was in Edmonton in August, months before the season and months after the season, and the Oilers were still the front page story of the Edmonton Sun. So I kind of feel like with a city like that, maybe you were ready for the kind of attention that you do get in a big city like New York.
Well, I played in New York for 3 years, so I knew this. Well, I don't think anybody ever knows the city, but I knew what to expect, and I had a pretty good idea that the ownership had changed in Edmonton. It was owned by 26 small investors, and the 26 of them thought that they knew more than I did. So it was, we were clashing heads. And I had a 5-year contract when I was in Edmonton at the end, and called the chairman of the board and said, listen, I'm going to resign. And he said, well, do I have to pay your contract? I said, no, I'm just going to walk away from it. I said, I had enough of you guys. And, I was fortunate to get a job in New York. And I'd had other offers, but I liked New York. It was a fun place to be. And there was a lot of work to be done, but it was, an exciting adventure for my wife and myself. So we were ready for a change. I loved Edmonton, enjoyed every minute there.
I have to ask you about a move, and he's going to be a guest coming up soon as well.
About who?
About Bryan Trottier.
Oh yeah, Brian.
He could part of that dynasty in the late 70s, early 80s in the NHL, Hall of Famer, but a New York Islander, and one of the most hated Islanders in the Rangers fan base probably ever, Potvin being there, Gillies, but definitely in the top three. And you thought maybe he'd work behind the Rangers bench. What spurred on that idea?
Well, I was looking for a coach, and Brian's name came up, and I sent him a list of questions, and he sent me a list of answers back, and they were terrific, and interviewed him, liked him. Smart hockey guy. And unfortunately, it didn't work out, but I thought it would have worked out.
Yeah.
Doesn't always work out.
Doesn't always work out, no. Do you and what do you do when it doesn't work out? Is it something you lament over? It's like, nope, this is just part of the job. I'm gonna screw up sometimes.
Well, the most important thing when you're running a hockey team is to try and do your decisions have to be based on what you think how it's gonna create the best team that you can have. And when you make a decision, you live with it and move on. And I've traded lots of guys, and they were friends when they played. There's a lot of them are still friends now. But when you see something that is going to be better for your team, that's what your role is, to make the team the best you can make it.
Mm-hmm.
You can't dwell on things like that. Well, this guy won't like me enough. I'm going to have to fire him or have to trade him. You have to do your job is to make the team the best that you can make it.
So how quickly did it get over being personal for you, or feeling personal? Because I imagine the first couple, I've only had to fire 2 people in my entire life, but I still think about it.
Anybody that is management in hockey, you can't make it personal. You just have to focus on what your job is and try to create the right atmosphere for people to work together and to get better and win. And at the end of the year, there's only one team that wins anyway. So you can't dwell on the things that you can't control. And you can try to control them, but it doesn't always work.
Right. And today, we're speaking on a Sunday afternoon. You've already watched 2 games, which is, it's funny how the players and people who are involved with the game, and you're still quite heavily involved in the game, their relationship with today's game. But clearly you're not just an employee within the NHL. You're still an avid viewer. You still find yourself enjoying the game, just watching it on TV.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm going to New York on Thursday. I'll be there till the end of the season, but I can't tell you how many games I've watched. Usually it's 3 or 4 a day. Because of the time zones out here, it makes it pretty convenient.
Yeah. And final question, Glenn, and This is just anecdotal, but it's an anecdote I believe that you told, and I'm going to ask for a rebuttal from the player it involves. I've heard that you claim Dave Schultz once sucker punched you.
Yeah, he did.
He did. So your official version of the story is Dave Schultz sucker punched you.
Yeah, I never even saw it.
Where were you and where was he, team-wise?
I was in New York. He was in Philadelphia.
Okay.
And cut me over the eye, but it did knock me out. And we ended up rolling around on the ice. And I saw him in the All-Star game in Dallas years after that. And he saw me walking by and he said, how's that eye of yours? I said, you can't punch with a dam because you couldn't even knock me out even when I didn't even see it coming. But he's a good guy. I think he's doing fine now.
Yeah, he's figuring stuff out.
Yeah, I mean, lots of things happen when you play against teams that you can't take them personally. You just have to let that stuff go.
I think that's hard for people who aren't players to understand. Like for me, because when I had Schultz on, he was describing a couple years after he left the Flyers and my dad left the Flyers. He was on the Kings. My dad was on the Penguins. They got into a fight, on the ice, obviously. That's just something I can't imagine. That's very, very strange to me. I know it's part of the job, but still to actually like throw punches at someone that is also part of the slogan, like win today and we walk together forever. Those are two worlds that would be hard for me to keep separate.
Well, it does occur and it does happen. I mean, I've had players fight each other in practice because some guy did something they didn't like and they get their fight over with and that would be fine.
Yeah.
And that's just the nature of the beast. It's passion in this game.
Yeah.
You have to play with passion.
Passionate enough to hit your friend.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Glenn, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Enjoy your trip back to New York, and I will never say go Rangers because I'm a Flyers fan, born and bred to hate them. But let's both beat the Devils. That sounds fun as much as possible.
Okay.
All right.
Take care.
Thank you, Glenn.
All right. Bye.
So long.